You are live. Welcome to the show. It is Friday, July 31st, 2026. It is an extremely exciting day. Why? Because we should celebrate every day. Yeah, that's what you should do. You should be happy every day. You should be thankful for everything. You should be always happy. You should always have a smile on your face. Something like that. Actually, we should, because you know what? You might die tomorrow. You might die later. Then what? What if you could talk to yourself? you would probably see you'd probably say something along the lines of, "Hey, I wish you appreciated those moments more," rather than take them for granted. But what am I talking about? Who knows? Who cares? It's the show. Let's get into it. Prison abolition. Abolish prisons. Can justice exist without mercy? This is a very interesting question. One of my friends gave me an essay. I read it because I know how to read. And then I dived into it. And I think what I took from this essay were three core tenets. Prison abolition rests on three arguments: prevention, financial cost, and the root of it that we're going to get to today: mercy. Not compassion. Some people use those words interchangeably, but mercy. Now, let me spoil everything before we get right into it. Prevention, getting to the root cause. Almost everyone has heard that argument already. Look at the underprivileged, the underserved. How do we prevent the crime from happening in the first place? Do these people have mental problems? Are they just deranged? Of course, you're going to have murderers and rapists out there, and those people, you probably do have to lock up. But for the overwhelming majority of people that are in prison today, 2 million people in the United States, can they be rehabilitated? And how do we prevent this from happening in the first place? It's not a novel argument. People have heard this countless times. But you know what? Most people don't have the patience, including myself. Most people don't care. It's way easier to throw them away and lock them up. Or lock them up and throw away the key. You don't have to worry about them. Out of sight, out of mind. So the first thing is getting to the root cause. The second thing is the financial cost. It is $1 billion business housing these people in jail. Does it make any financial sense that our tax dollars are going towards this? Well, yes, it's keeping us safe, so we think. But could that money be spent better elsewhere? And the third argument is mercy. And if you are Christian, if you are Catholic, if you believe in God, if you believe in Jesus, remember, he could have went either way. God could have went either way here. He could have punished us. We deserve no salvation. You know that. You believe that, right? But instead, God and his son, Jesus Christ, said what? No, let us have compassion. Let us have mercy. Let us save them. That's the first thing, right? It's two parts on that third core tenet. The second aspect is the lesson to be learned from mercy. Because the lessons learned from mercy are far different than the lessons learned from punishment. Imagine you were forgiven. You have been if you believe in God. Imagine you were forgiven over and over and over again. Imagine you were given mercy for a crime that you committed. You learn a totally separate lesson, a valuable one, when you're shown mercy versus then being punished. So let's get into it. There are nearly 2 million people locked inside American prisons and jails right now. Many of them are subject to threats, fights, violence. I have a friend, and he's a very sweet person. Unfortunately, he's in prison right now. and he's been in solitary confinement because he just loves fighting. He's been in solitary confinement for 6 months. Do you think that's humane? That shit is beyond, like, he's going to get out in a few years, hopefully. Is he going to be the same person? Of course not. That's brain damage. Solitary confinement for 6 months? What we're doing to people in prisons, we're putting them in cages like animals. And I know everyone's going to say, what do you do with the people that commit abhorrent crimes? This is why we have to have the conversation. This is why I really don't like the term abolish prisons. It's what can we do differently? It's not about, hey, let's get rid of the whole prison system, because you're really not going to get any traction with that argument, especially in today's day and age. In today's society, let's be realistic. We have to say, hey, let's rethink this system. Is it humane? Would God want us to do this? If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, and I absolutely love Jesus, right? I love God so much. He can kill me right now. Do whatever you got to do. I'd easily die for him. Do you think, or what do you think Jesus would do in this case? Don't you think he would choose to be closer to the people that are committing crimes, to the people that he thinks are furthest away from him? We've got a long argument here. So, yes, we have to do something about the murderers and the rapists, right? The people that are committing these heinous crimes. But at the same time, keep in mind the word mercy. Mercy, not compassion. It is a different word, and it's a different word for a reason. I usually use the word compassion. We should have compassion for one another. This is totally different. We are talking about mercy. You guys remember the game Mercy? When someone would twist it's like you guys clasp hands, and whoever could twist each other's fingers the most, and one person would have to cry mercy. I lost all the time. Yeah, really. Like girls, like when I was like in 5th grade, 6th grade, girls would overpower me. It's all about technique, and I'd be like, mercy. I'd be like, leave me alone. Stop. Oh, I used to hate that game. I don't even know why I would challenge people. Sometimes they would challenge me. Let's get this besides the point. Okay, so there are nearly 2 million people locked inside American prisons and jails today. 2 million people. We can't even count that high. Prison abolition asks us to examine 3 parts of that system: why people commit crimes in the first place, what it costs society to incarcerate them, and whether justice can exist without mercy. Do not say anything is impossible, y'all. You, the listener, the viewer, you can do anything you put your mind to. They told you that in kindergarten. They told you that when you were an adolescent. And then somewhere along the way, when we become adults, we forget about all of that because we enter into the matrix, the rat race of it all. We become jaded and we just stick to what we know. No, things are not impossible. We can revamp this system. We can make for a better society. That's what these questions are asking. When people hear prison abolition, they usually imagine every prison opening tomorrow and every person inside walking free. That is not what we are saying. That is not the full argument. Prison abolition is the long-term belief that society should stop using incarceration as its standard response. Yes, we do need an answer to harm. But can we build systems centered on prevention, accountability, treatment, restitution, and rehabilitation? I think we can. Now, of course, these are just words. We need plans in place. And there are many plans that have been introduced. There is a way to do this. There are paths. However, we first have to begin speaking about the subject. We have to make it transparent enough, understood well enough, so that we can try to transform this system. The unresolved question is what happens when someone remains an immediate danger to other people. Even among those who reject punishment, there is still a need to protect potential victims. I'm on everyone's side here. If you watch the show, you know that I usually don't say anything far-fetched. I joke around a lot, but for the most part, I'm not going to say anything cliche, and I'm not going to try to take an edge case to try to make an argument. I think we can all agree that we want a safe country. Let's keep that in the backdrop. We cannot sacrifice the safety and security of our countrymen. Now, the United States currently confines nearly 2 million people across prisons, local jails, juvenile facilities, immigration detention centers, and other institutions. Part of the problem there is that a lot of this is privatized. So people are making money from it. And we've seen many cases already where judges have part ownership in these jails, which is preposterous. I mean, seriously, we have to look at the corruption and crime that perpetuates these jail systems to exist in the first place. Another roughly 3.8 million people are on probation or parole. About 79 million Americans have some form of a criminal record, meaning punishment can continue through lost jobs, housing restrictions, and social exclusion long after a formal sentence ends. So even if the punishment fit the crime and the person served the punishment, we are endlessly making them pay restitution for the crime that they committed. Because if you're a felon, you can't get most jobs out there. If you have a misdemeanor, it's something that you still have to explain. You're essentially castrated and outcast from society. And by the way, that's a huge economic burden on our society. You have to look at it that way as well. You're not just indirectly affected, you are directly affected, because this goes into how much things cost, how much GDP we produce. Ultimately, if you're interested in the stock market, job numbers, inflation, this is all tied together. The abolitionist argument rests on three core ideas. The first is prevention. Can we prevent it? Can we prevent anything? Before you think that this idea is so far-fetched, can we prevent it? Why do people commit crimes in the first place? There isn't one explanation, of course. Poverty does not automatically produce criminality. And of course, wealthy people commit crimes too. They just tend to get away with it because they have the resources to get out of their problems. But lack of opportunity, unstable housing, untreated mental illness, addiction, failing schools, childhood trauma, and exposure to violence can all increase the conditions in which crime develops. Think about yourself. Think about how fortunate you were to be born in the circumstance in which you were, in which you were born into. My parents didn't grow up rich. My parents were poor in Cairo. They came here with nothing, and they built something. But I wasn't born in the ghetto. I was born in a private house. Of course, they had to borrow that money from friends and family, and then, of course, they had to get a mortgage on the house. They figured it out. But was I born in the projects? No, I was alongside them. I was still raised in the street, but it all depends on circumstance. I'm sure if I was born in some type of New York City housing development, I would have a completely different life. Maybe one that didn't afford me the opportunities that I was given. So where's the equity in that? Is that fair at all? Of course it's not. The person that's born in a mansion, in a great community that's never subject to violence or theft or any form of aggression, versus the person that's born in a housing project has a completely different life. Yes, they're running in parallel, but they're on opposite sides of the spectrum. Society has understood this for a long time. It has almost been cliche to say that we should attack crime at its root. The harder part is actually funding those solutions before someone gets hurt. It costs money to provide functioning schools, mental health treatment, addiction services, stable housing, and employment opportunities. But it also costs money when we neglect those problems. When we wait for an offense to occur and then respond with police, courts, and decades of incarceration, that hurts our economy. Those people are not working, and we have to pay for all of those processes and procedures and people in place to make sure that those people stay in jail. Prison abolitionists argue that prison allows society to remove a person without addressing the conditions that helped produce the crime, because we just yank them off the street and throw them in a cell. We isolate the offender, but the neighborhood still lacks opportunity. So where are we solving the problem? Aren't we just addressing the outcome? The addiction remains untreated. The next child experiences the same instability. We punish the result while repeatedly reproducing the conditions. So what do you expect to happen? And no, don't be cross here. Don't be ridiculous in saying that we have to get rid of all housing projects. We have to attack the inequality at its root. If we have better schools, better education, less drugs on the street, better mentorship, we have to pay for these services. If people have a better quality of life, there should be less crime. Now, how do we produce that type of environment? Well, people have to get out of the projects, but how do we do that? Are we giving them their best shot at education? And before you start thinking about affirmative action or DEI, yes, those are some good ideas to apply in this case. If the rich can afford a great education, they're going to go out and get it. The poor can't afford it. So put them in the good schools, give them resources. That's how you attack the problem. A well-educated individual is not going to commit violent crimes for the most part, right? I can't unequivocally say that, and I'm not unequivocally saying it. But there will be less violent crime. There will be less of these egregious crimes that we want people in prison for. Now, that does not absolve an individual of responsibility. Two people can suffer the same deprivation and make completely different decisions. Personal responsibility still matters, but if certain conditions consistently increase danger, a serious public safety strategy should try to change those conditions before another victim is created. We all want a safer society. If there was more equality, then I don't think we would have these types of crimes. We would have far less of them. There is a correlation here to pay attention to. The second argument is financial. There is no single national figure that exclusively measures the cost of physically housing nearly 2 million people, because federal, state, and local governments maintain separate systems. But a 2026 estimate places government spending on corrections, including prisons, jails, probation, and parole, at about $116 billion per year. That works out to roughly $317 million every day. New York City's budget annually is $115 billion. You don't think we can spend this money elsewhere? Couldn't we take half of this $116 billion. That's a lot of money, y'all. That's a lot of money. I know we just throw out the word billion and trillion today, but that money could be put to good use. The broader criminal legal system, including policing, courts, corrections, and immigration enforcement, costs governments and affected families at least $445 billion annually. Food and healthcare for incarcerated people alone are estimated at about $18 billion a year, even though the quality of both is frequently criticized. So all in all, we're spending about, let's say, $600 billion a year from the courts, corrections, prisons, immigration enforcement, all of this together. It costs the government about $600 billion a year. And by the way, it doesn't just cost the government $600 billion a year. That's our money. So when someone says prisoners should receive better food, stronger healthcare, more educational programs, or more comfortable living conditions, many taxpayers respond, why should my money provide amenities to someone who committed a crime? The reaction is understandable, of course. People are already struggling with rent, healthcare, and groceries. They do not want prison to resemble a reward. But guess what? The money is being spent either way, isn't it? The current system is already extraordinarily expensive. Almost half of correctional operating money goes toward employees. And the public continues paying for this: building, security, overtime, food, and medical treatment, regardless of whether those institutions successfully rehabilitate anyone. Now, you're not going to call it a sunk cost because they're off the streets. Therefore, you think that we're safer. The financial defense of incarceration is public safety. Americans accept the expense because prisons separate dangerous people from the public. If someone presents a continuing threat, that separation has clear value. He's a menace to society. Throw him away. But how many people require that degree of confinement? For how long and at what cost? Again, y'all, if we look back historically, we have seen so many different cases of corruption. Remember, there's a lot of money to be made in prisons. $600 billion a year. There are so many people getting a piece of this action. Do you think they want prisons to go away? No, far from it. They want this to exist in perpetuity. But I ask you, could some of these people just be supervised or treated or required to make restitution outside prison for less money without increasing danger? Could part of that $116 billion spent on prisons prevent crime more effectively if it were spent before the crime occurred? What do you think? Think about this. We have to try, right? Because remember the last core tenet. What about mercy? What would Jesus want you to do? What would he do if he were here? And he is here. He's abundantly here. If you believe in God, you know that he is omnipresent. He is watching us. He knows what we are doing, what we are thinking at all times. Wouldn't he want us to rethink this process? At least try? And when somebody ages out of the period in which they present the greatest risk, are taxpayers still purchasing safety or merely continuing a punishment? I agree, I want a safer society. I just want to do it in a more humane way. And that leads us to the third and most important argument: mercy. Mercy does not mean pretending that nobody was harmed. It does not mean denying the suffering of a murder victim's family. or telling an abused woman to reconcile with her abuser, or allowing someone dangerous to continue hurting people. Mercy begins where accountability has already been established. It asks whether another human being should forever be reduced to the worst thing they have ever done. The Christian argument traces that idea through several biblical stories. Jonah warns Nineveh that destruction is coming. The city repents, God spares it, and Jonah becomes angry. Jonah wanted the people to receive what he believed they deserved. God chose mercy. In the parable of the prodigal son, the younger son wastes his inheritance and returns home in disgrace. The father does not pretend nothing happened. The money remains gone, but while the son is still approaching, the father runs toward him. The older brother is furious because mercy feels unfair when you believe you earned your place at the table. That may be the emotional center of this entire debate. We often experience mercy given to someone else as an injustice against us. Then there is Zacchaeus, the corrupt tax collector. Jesus does not begin by banishing or humiliating him. He enters his home. The encounter produces accountability. Zacchaeus promises to give half of his possessions to the poor and repay 4 times what he took from anyone he defrauded. Addicted men. One asks to be remembered, and Jesus offers him paradise. Jesus then asks forgiveness for the people carrying out his own execution. Christianity's central image is not an innocent man demanding maximum punishment against the guilty. It is an innocent man, Jesus, extending mercy while the guilty are still hurting him. Jesus chose mercy. He could have punished us, but he chose mercy because he said, not only do I want them saved, but I also want them to live with the lesson of mercy itself. Imagine we had to live with the lesson of punishment. We would be living different lives today, bar none. Now, that does not automatically tell a government how to handle every violent offender, but we do have to ask ourselves, what would Jesus do in this situation? Would he want us to abolish prisons? No, that's unrealistic. Would he want us to try to improve society? Yes. Would he want us to show mercy? Yes, he did it himself over and over again. A state has responsibilities that an individual does not. It must protect people who could be harmed again. We understand all of this, but mercy toward an offender cannot become abandonment of a victim. It creates a moral problem for Christians who treat severe punishment as inherently righteous. If people can repent, why do we build sentences that assume they never will? These people have changed, right? If redemption is real and you believe in it, why do criminal records continue closing doors after a person has completed the punishment imposed by the court? If mercy is truly central to Christianity, why is mercy often treated as weakness the moment the person receiving it has done something we find unforgivable? Jesus, God, has forgiven every type of criminal. Who are we to say what punishment fits the crime? Yes, we have judges, we have courts, we have systems in place to make society more secure and safer. It does not stop us from trying to be more humane, from trying to show mercy and compassion towards one another. There's also a practical distinction between punishment and protection. Society may need to separate a person who presents a continuing danger, but separation does not have to mean degradation. A secure facility could still provide safety, education, treatment, human contact, and regular opportunities to demonstrate change. We are locking them up in cages like animals. Would that technically remain a prison under another name? Maybe. That is one of the weaknesses prison abolitionists must confront honestly. Some people commit catastrophic violence, and compassion cannot erase that risk. So maybe we do have to keep them locked up, but there are other ways to treat them. Solitary confinement is not one of them. Of course, the opposite failure is also real, using the most frightening cases imaginable to justify how we treat every incarcerated person, including people awaiting trial, people detained because they cannot afford bail, and aging prisoners whose risk has fallen dramatically. We cannot use them as the ultimate examples here to perpetuate the prison idea. Age matters. A federal study found that over 8 years, about 68% of people released before age 21 were rearrested, compared with roughly 13% of those released at 65 or older. Risk does not disappear. We have to accept that idea. We have to pay attention to these statistics. And rearrest is also not the same thing as conviction. But a justice system interested in public safety would recognize that people change and risk changes with them. So I want to dive into the morality of this because mercy is the most important word here. If somebody was falsely accused, releasing them isn't mercy. That is justice. If somebody never harmed anyone, treating them humanely isn't mercy. That is the bare minimum. How would you want to be treated? Mercy enters the picture when a person genuinely did something terrible. When anger is understandable, punishment is legally available, and society would applaud us for being merciless. That is when mercy actually costs something. And I'm not going to sit here and tell the mother of a murdered child that she owes the murderer forgiveness. That's for her to say. That would be its own form of cruelty. The victim does not exist merely to complete somebody else's redemption story. But society has to make a separate decision. Are we protecting people, demanding accountability, and creating the possibility of repair? Or are we satisfying our desire to watch somebody suffer? And I'm not going to exaggerate here. I don't believe that we all just want to see people suffer in prisons. But when we come back to this word, mercy, second and third chances in life, what would Jesus do in this situation? As a good Christian, as a good Catholic, shouldn't we try to rethink this system? Accountability says, name what you did, understand who you harmed, repay what can be repaid, and accept the restrictions necessary to protect others. Retribution says, you caused pain, so now pain must be inflicted upon you. Mercy does not eliminate accountability. Mercy prevents accountability from becoming vengeance. That is why the Christian component here is so uncomfortable. Christians celebrate a faith in which none of us receives exactly what we deserve. We sing about grace, we pray for forgiveness, we build our entire theology around redemption, and then sometimes demand that another human being be frozen forever at the lowest moment of his life. Do you think Jesus would agree with that approach? So I can confidently say here that every prison should disappear. So can I confidently say here that every prison should disappear tomorrow? No. I don't know what we do. I don't know what we do with every serial killer, every predator, or every person who remains determined to hurt others. Any serious abolitionist vision has to answer that without minimizing the danger or experimenting with someone else's safety. But I can say this: a system without mercy is not automatically a system of justice. Mercy may mean shortening a sentence when a person has demonstrably changed. It may mean treating addiction as a health problem before it becomes a criminal one. What about allowing someone to work and live somewhere after completing a sentence, giving them some other opportunities to truly rehabilitate themselves? It may mean secure but humane confinement for the small number of people who cannot safely return to the public. And sometimes mercy may mean release. The test of a society is not whether it can show compassion to the innocent. Almost everyone can do that if we try. The test is whether it can attack the conditions that produce crime, protect the public, honor the victim, and spend public money intelligently, hold the guilty accountable, and still refuse to surrender the guilty person's humanity. If we believe no one is beyond God's mercy, can we continue building a justice system that behaves as though millions of people are? How do you think Jesus would define mercy? How do you think he would want us to treat criminals? We have all committed sin. We have all committed crimes. How should we rehabilitate ourselves? How should we rethink the process in which we isolate these individuals and essentially give them no chance at life? We only get one of these. We are all going to run out of time. They made poor decisions. They made malevolent decisions. Is there a way that we can show mercy? By A, rethinking prevention of crime. B, looking at the financial costs here and seeing where we can spend this money more adequately to protect society and the people committing those crimes. And C, ultimately, showing true compassion, showing true mercy to these individuals. All right, next topic. Damn, we have hard cutovers here because we're getting into Apple's earnings. Now, Apple just posted its earnings. It was at all-time highs. Now it's down 10%. And by the way, it just posted record earnings. So why did the stock fall? It had one of its best quarters ever. Revenue was up, profit was up, iPhone sales surged, Mac sales were up, services hit another record. And yet the stock still fell after earnings. Now let's walk through this graphic. Revenue year over year was up 16%, $109 billion. Net income was up 27% year over year. So if you own this business, if you own Apple, if you own the S&P 500 or any other ETF, you're an Apple shareholder. You're an owner of this company. So congratulations. Earnings per share was up 29% year over year. If you grew 29% in a year, I think you'd be extremely happy. You'd be delighted with your business. iPhone revenues were up 22%. Mac revenues were up 29%. Services revenues were up 12%. Still growing, though investors wanted even faster expansion. We'll come back to that. And iPad revenue was down 6%, down roughly 6% year over year. Investors did not like that. Wearables were essentially flat, $8 billion. And AI and capital spending, Apple continues investing in Apple Intelligence, on-device AI, and supply chain expansion. This comes from their earnings call. But management warned that memory shortages and supply constraints could pressure upcoming quarters. Why the stock fell? In a nutshell, the quarter itself was strong. Investors focused on weaker than expected guidance for next quarter due to supply constraints and higher component costs, sending shares lower after earnings despite record results. There is a memory crunch, and that's why they're not only raising prices, but they can't create the products that we all know and love. Now, here's what I think investors are trying to figure out. Apple is no longer just selling iPhones. It's not just about their hard products. They are quietly becoming an AI company, but it's taking a very different approach than companies like Meta or Microsoft. Instead of spending hundreds of billions of dollars building giant AI data centers, Apple is betting that AI belongs on your devices, on your iPhone, your Mac, your iPad, eventually your glasses. Here's the investment thesis. Apple Intelligence is just getting started. They were late to the game, and the company is slowly integrating AI throughout its ecosystem rather than launching one massive standalone chatbot. Then you have services. The App Store, iCloud, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, Apple TV, Apple Care, payments. These businesses keep generating recurring revenue every single quarter. Every new iPhone sold creates another long-term customer inside Apple's ecosystem. And that ecosystem is still one of the strongest competitive advantages in the world. They have over 2 billion users. Then there are future products. The company continues investing in wearables, and CEO Tim Cook has repeatedly made it clear that Apple is committed to augmented reality. Many investors believe lightweight AI-powered smart glasses could eventually become the next major computing platform. Apple has also introduced new ways for consumers to buy its products, including subscription-style upgrades and financing options that make expensive devices easier to afford while encouraging customers to stay within the Apple ecosystem. So why did the stock fall? Because the market doesn't just buy today's earnings, it buys tomorrow's expectations. Management warned about supply constraints, particularly around memory needed for AI devices, along with rising component costs. Investors also wanted stronger guidance for the next quarter. In other words, Wall Street wasn't disappointed by what Apple did, it was disappointed by what Apple said might happen next. That's the strange thing about earnings. Sometimes you can report record revenue, record profits, beat expectations across the board, and still watch your stock go down because expectations were even higher. And there are some unanswered questions. Are people going to buy an iPhone if it's $200 more in cost? Are they going to be able to produce enough of their products to be able to sell in regards to these expectations? Well, if there's a supply crunch, maybe they can't get these components in time. But of course, the real question now is whether Apple's AI strategy pays off over the next 3 to 5 years. Do you believe it will? Do you believe that Apple will stay in existence the next 10 or 20 years? If you are, then you remain an investor. And this is still the best stock on the market. The most valuable company in the world. And if Apple can successfully integrate AI in more than 2 billion active devices, and eventually expand into products like AI powered glasses, it may not need to win the chatbot race. It may simply need to make the devices people already use every day just a little bit smarter. And that could end up being one of the biggest AI businesses in the world. What I love about Apple is that they took their time with the AI spending. I want everyone to spend on CapEx. However, they were one of the few major companies to sit back and let it all unfold. And now they can actually leverage LLMs. They didn't create their own. They're actually leveraging Google's and Gemini's. Instead, they sought a partnership and said, we'll use your AI data center. We'll use your AI data center. Instead, they said, we'll use your AI data. Instead, they said, we'll use your AI data center. We'll use your large language model. And then we'll just enhance our services and products downstream for our consumers. Will that pay off? If you believe in Apple, and now you're going to have CEO John Turnus take the helm. This was actually Tim Cook's last earnings call, and he's a hardware guy. He's an engineer at heart. So you should see a lot more robust products being introduced going forward. I am an owner of Apple, and I intend to stay one. All right, let's get into the next topic. Next topic. I know you want the next topic. I got you. I got you, buddy. And this is a big topic. They're all big topics. Nah, I mean, Jelly Bean. All right. Trump announces Hamas disarmament deal. Israel has not yet signed on. President Trump says his Board of Peace has reached an agreement for the complete disarmament of Hamas and every other arms group operating inside Gaza. Wow. What do we do here? Do we applaud? Look, y'all. I had to get educated on this. There is a reason why Hamas exists. Hamas exists because at some point, when you are oppressed to the level that the Gazans, the Palestinians have faced, when you're locked up in your own city, when you're not free to travel from one place to another, when you are subject to aggressions, microaggressions, violent tactics, when you are displaced from your home, when your property is stolen, you fight back. I am not a Hamas sympathizer. I don't know enough about the region. However, I have read enough to know that there's a reason why people fight back, right? It's the same thing as protesting. You call them Hamas, you call them Black Lives Matter, you call them No Kings Protest, whatever you want to call it, it's a resistance, right? Now, most people are going to just say that they're terrorists. Well, if you're willing to call Hamas terrorists, and I would say so, because look at what they did on October 7th, right? I could agree with you there. I agree. What they did should have never been done. But there is an argument to say that that was just one battle of many. Israel and Palestine have been fighting for as long as that land has existed. You're going to tell me that Israel has committed no crimes? Is Israel totally innocent here? Well, that's why you have a Hamas to begin with. What did you think Palestinians were going to do? Just turn the other cheek their entire lives? Most of them did. Most Palestinians just said, what can I do? I'm just going to accept it. I'm going to try to live on my land for as long as I can, but I have to accept it, right? Because they're the ones with the guns. They're the ones with the power. And they're the ones being supported internationally by other nations like the United States. Therefore, we stand no chance. But then there was a small little group that formed a militia. And that's what Hamas is. I'm not defending Hamas at all. I don't know anything about them, but I can understand why Hamas exists to begin with. They exist because Palestinians were tired of being pushed around. And now they are going to disarm. Makes sense to me. I actually wanted them to disarm the entire time. I wanted them to give back the hostages earlier than they did. But my first question here is, okay, they gave back the hostages. Let's say they gave back the hostages immediately. Let's say they disarmed 2 years ago. Let's say they disarmed in 2024. What do you think Israel's going to do? I'll tell you what Israel's going to do. They're still going to control Gaza. They're still going to control the West Bank. You're still going to see egregious crimes being committed. The only way a two-state solution exists is if the entire globe says it will. And then, of course, it's enforced. It's either that or a one-state solution. At this point, I don't care if you call it Israel. 20% of Israel is Arab. Are they going to have representation? Probably not. In the government or in elections? Probably not. But if they had some safety and security, that's all I would want for Palestinians after seeing the atrocities that were committed. Now, under the proposed roadmap, Hamas would surrender its weapons in phases. Military infrastructure and tunnel networks would be dismantled, and control of Gaza would gradually transfer to a new Palestinian technocratic administration. So this is still following the idea that we can have a two-state solution, because we are going to have a Palestinian administration if this were to unfold. An international stabilization force would help secure the territory, train Palestinian police, and monitor whether each side is fulfilling its obligations. As Hamas disarms and the new administration takes control of additional territory, Israeli forces would gradually withdraw from Gaza. So on paper, this argument attempts to solve the central problem that has prevented the next stage of the peace process from moving forward to begin with. Israel has refused to fully withdraw while Hamas remains armed. Hamas has refused to surrender its weapons without guarantees that Israel will leave. This plan tries to make those two things happen together in stages with international verification between each stage. Now, this is not yet a completed peace deal. Israel has not formally approved the agreement. A Hamas official said the group will not begin implementing it until Israel accepts the plan. And Hamas still wants the withdrawal and disarmament processes to happen simultaneously. Israel's position has generally been that Hamas must disarm first. That sequencing question matters because neither side wants to surrender its leverage before the other side moves. Who gives up something first? Well, why don't we have a third-party mediator, I don't know, like the United States, step in, apply some pressure, have some troops there maybe, monitor the situation, and say, Israel, withdraw, Hamas, disarm. Yeah, I'm making it sound simple, but if we're the most powerful military on earth and we essentially control Israel, at least giving them military and financial assistance, we can make this happen if we wanted to. So who should give something up first? I mean, why do we even have that debate? What are we, children? Does Hamas surrender its heavy weapons before Israeli troops begin leaving? Or does Israel withdraw from portions of Gaza before Hamas turns over those weapons? I don't know how you're going to verify all of this, but hopefully there's some honesty in the process. But that disagreement could still derail the entire deal. There is also the question of what complete disarmament actually means. The roadmap reportedly covers rockets, heavy weapons, militia structures, tunnels, and other military infrastructure. Personal weapons would be regulated by the new Gaza administration, while surrendered weapons would be stored or removed under international supervision. But Gaza contains years of hidden weapons, underground tunnels, and decentralized armed groups. Verifying that every major weapons stockpile has been surrendered could take months and possibly longer. The broader plan also depends on a new Palestinian government gaining enough legitimacy to administer Gaza. Who's going to distribute aid? They need to rebuild public services and maintain security without Hamas returning to power. If Hamas disarms, they are still going to be among the people. This is why Trump is calling the announcement historic, but the announcement itself is only the beginning. The real story is that Hamas appears to have accepted a roadmap under which it could eventually surrender its military power and its control over Gaza. And by the way, I've had this argument many times over. The reason why I disliked Hamas so much, even though I understand why they formed as a resistance group to begin with, is because what gave them the right to launch those attacks on October 7th? Look at the retaliation that ensued. It was a genocide. That small group, I never believed, and I still don't believe, can speak for the masses. Did all Palestinians want them to do that on October 7th? That's why I have so much trouble and angst when discussing Hamas. Now, some people are going to say that it was for the greater good because look at what it did societally. The narrative has now changed. The entire world sees Israel as the enemy. So maybe, I don't know, 100,000 lives were worth it? Who can say that? Do you think Hamas has the right to say that? That's why I have such a problem discussing Hamas. Now, if Hamas does surrender, this would be an enormous change. Hamas has governed Gaza since 2007. Its armed wing and its weapons have been central to its political power for nearly 2 decades. Giving those weapons up would not simply be a ceasefire concession. It could mean Hamas effectively accepting the end of its role as Gaza's ruling military organization. So yes, the dynamic will change there on the ground. But none of this matters unless Israel agrees. Israel, please, accept peace. The weapons should be surrendered. The tunnels should be dismantled. And Israeli troops should be withdrawn. We have seen peace announcements before. We've seen them for hundreds of years at this point. We have seen ceasefires announced, hostages exchanged, and negotiations restarted over and over again, only to see the fighting return. So I would not call this peace yet, of course. I would call it a potentially historic framework to allow both sides to actually accept living alongside one another, treating each other humanely, and allowing both nations to coexist. If they solve this issue with sequencing, who gives up what first, this could create a real path forward. If they cannot, then we are just looking at another agreement thrown into the wind that sounded historic on paper, but never made it past the announcement. At some point, both sides have to concede. The world is watching, the world is waiting for this. We don't want to see any more bloodshed. We haven't since day one. In order for you to do the right thing, there has to be some compassion. There has to be some acquiescence. This could be the start to a new beginning. I think it's best that we as a humanity remain optimistic. Thank you for watching. See you next time.